TopMedTalk.
Welcome to TopMedTalk, the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, evidence-based perioperative medicine. Stand by for a healthy conversation. But first, the 2026 International Practicum on Cardiopulmonary Exercise Testing will be held from September the 16th to the 18th of this year. It is organised by iPoets, the International Perioperative Testing and Training Society. Come and join us at this premier educational event designed for clinicians, scientists and healthcare professionals interested in sport, exercise and perioperative medicine. Check out ebpom.org for the best prices and information now. That's ebpom.org. And remember, this is an International Perioperative Testing and Training Society accredited event. So when you attend, you can get your iPoets accreditation showing that you are a practitioner who has reached a high standardized level of competence in performing and interpreting cardiopulmonary exercise testing for patients preparing for major surgery. Check out ebpom.org now.
Hello, and welcome to TopMedTalk AI, TopMedTalk's monthly series on all things artificial intelligence and its role in perioperative medicine. Today, we're hosting and recording live at the EBPOM World Congress in a very hot London. I'm your host, James Bowness. Delighted to be co-hosting today with Amy Gomes. Hi, Amy.
Hey, nice to meet you.
How are you getting on today? How are you finding it?
It's lovely. It's my first time actually coming to the British Library. Brilliant venue, very busy.
And today we've got with us Joe Harris and Sanjay Wijayatilake, who are here to talk to us about AI demand signaling in intensive care. Joe, Sanjay, do you want to tell us a bit about yourselves?
My name's Joe. I'm an anaesthesia resident here in London, working at University College London Hospital, where I'm in post as the Innovation Fellow in Anaesthesia. And I've been working on this demand signalling project, first in anaesthesia, but also now expanding to other high acuity specialties, such as ICM and emergency medicine, which we're here to talk about today.
Hi, I'm Sanjay. I'm a consultant in anaesthesia and intensive care medicine at Barking, Havering and Redbridge Trust in East London. I heard about the demand signaling project this year and I approached James. Thought it'd be perfect to do in ICU. I sit on the board of the Perioperative Association. I'm also on the Faculty of Intensive Care Professional Affairs Committee, and we've been talking a lot about how intensive care is going to be affected by ICU. We put out a position statement last year, so that's really how I became involved.
Fantastic. And by James, of course, you mean me, so we'll kind of bring it about. But the listeners may be familiar that we launched this TopMedTalk AI series at one of the AI demand signaling events for anaesthesia in April of this year. Joe, do you want to give us a bit of background to demand signaling?
Yeah, so the term isn't necessarily self-explanatory. Demand signaling is really a means by which we try and identify and explore clinical needs for new technology, in this case, artificial intelligence. Often, a lot of AI development and technology development is undertaken by industry. Sometimes industry don't involve clinicians from the outset of that technological development. And what that means is that the tools we end up with in our clinical practice can sometimes lack impact when put in the hands of clinicians on the front line. The aim of demand signaling is to redress that, and it's to start with clinical problems and then using that as a starting point to then work with industry to address the biggest issues that people feel at the front line of their clinical work. And then together to create new collaborations, clinicians, industry, academia, all together to create technological solutions to those problems.
Amy, as someone who's been involved in the perioperative care environment, but not in the demand signaling kind of process, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, definitely in the terms of industry not being on the shop floor, not understanding what the real life problems are, especially here in the UK. And Joe, I spoke to you earlier about some of the problems that I find are difficult and whether or not these translate into, I suppose, industry problems. And I think that's a really nice bridge between the two.
Yeah, an analogy I've used in the past is that Lewis Hamilton, when he drives an F1 car, he doesn't make the F1 car, but I'm sure he has a say in
how it is.
Yeah, how it performs, what it does, the fact that it doesn't corner quickly enough or whatever it is. So I think we as clinicians, 99% of us probably don't make AI-based devices, and we don't necessarily need to. But the point is, if we're going to be implementing them, if we're going to be utilizing them in clinical practice, we need to have some influence over which areas there are pain points that we need to address. Well, how does it do it? How do we get that out safely and effectively? So Joe, before we come on to Sanjay, in the ICU activities, give us a bit of an update on the anaesthesia activities.
So the demand signaling project in anaesthesia has now run to completion. The methodology that we use has 3 stages. So we start with a national clinical survey, surveying, in the case of anaesthesia, all anaesthesia clinicians in the UK and in Ireland. And once we survey the clinicians on the biggest clinical problems in their practice, those problems are then translated into potential candidate AI use cases, which are prioritized through a panel of Delphi experts. And then we enter into a phase of multidisciplinary discussions, which involve clinicians, researchers, patients, policymakers, industry, in order to explore those potential AI use cases from different perspectives and different angles. And that whole process has now been completed in anaesthesia. We are going through the results and preparing the manuscript for academic publication. And we're now developing the same methodology and rolling out in intensive care medicine, where our survey is currently now open to all ICM clinicians in the UK. And that includes doctors, nurses, allied health professionals, dietitians, pharmacists. So we really want to hear from everybody about the highest priority issues that we need to address for AI in the future.
And that's an important point. The survey is open at the minute, right, Joe? It'll be live until the 31st of July. So if you're listening to this podcast, remember the Intensive Care Society, the Faculty of Intensive Care Medicine, you're a practicing clinician, physician in intensive care within the last 12 months within the UK. We want to hear from you. You can find the link in the podcast download link. So have a look at the survey. Please fill it in. It's only a short period of time. We really want to hear your voice. So moving on to ICU then, Sanjay, you said this project in ICU spawned out of a conversation that we'd had about the anaesthesia work. Tell me, what was your first thoughts when you saw the anaesthesia one? And then where is AI in intensive care at the minute?
I might take a slight governance aspect to answer this question. AI is a medical device, and that's really important to understand. And there are many AI tools out there already. For example, there's a tool which you can take a picture of an ECG and analyze it. There's tools which will help you analyze blood results, etc. But if you haven't had them come through your governance process within your hospital, you're going to have some sticky problems there. There's also a medical legal aspect to it as well, from the point of view that normally, if you look at the Bowling test or any of the other legal tests, you have to assign somebody to have responsibility. But as a clinician, as an ICU physician at the bedside, if I have AI integrated into my Cerner, my Epic, or whatever, and it gives me a recommendation, admit, don't admit, do this treatment, don't do this treatment, there's a huge problem because people can't understand what's happening in that black box. So if you have a bad outcome, you say, don't admit the patient, and actually you should have, who's liable? That was one of the things which frightened me. And I've seen a lot of my colleagues using these things on the side, just to, for example, check an ECG without really understanding the impact of it. But it's a massive opportunity. I've been playing with Claude Cowork. It's increased my output 200%. And we live in ICU in a very data-rich environment. We only got our EPR last year in October. UCLH, I believe, had it about a decade ago or whatever. And what we found is we got our EPR, I'm not going to name it, but our workflows are 20% longer. That shouldn't happen. It should be 50% faster, surely. And I think the reason for that is, in my amazing amount of part-time and big dig and MBA, one of the concepts within there is design thinking. And exactly as Joe said, no one's asked the clinician, what do we need? The route to failure with any implementation is not asking people what they need. We're giving them something a company thinks they need.
That's a Jeff Bezos-ism, isn't it, with Amazon? It's this relentless focus on the consumer experience. And it all stems from that, sometimes to a fault, but I think that's not a mantra we see in healthcare AI, is it? So that before we get into the ICU AI demand signaling project, I just want to kind of go back a bit, and Amy, maybe draw you in a bit here. You'd said, Sanjay, you think AI is a medical device. Is it always a medical device, guys, do you think? I mean, when does it bridge from being a technological function to a medical device? Where's that?
I suppose it's any time you just involve a patient, whether it be looking at an ECG or getting a second opinion. My portfolio, I use AI to write my reflections. I wouldn't say it's a medical device then, but I think, yeah, as soon as you bring a patient into it, then that's when liability gets a bit confusing. And what you said, Sanjay, I think would hit the nail on the head. It's how do you understand how these are working and how do you explain it to your patient?
Can I kind of play devil's advocate there?
Yeah.
A camera? Is that a medical device when it's facing a patient?
I suppose if you're taking a picture of a patient or a knee, a toe, then I suppose yes. Yeah.
Guys, what do you think?
I think this is a complex area, isn't it? The regulation of AI is quite controversial at the moment. Obviously, lots of AI devices or software applications are regulated as a medical device and they fall under that regulatory governance framework. Whether it should or not is probably up for debate. I'm aware that the regulatory environment and landscape in the UK is currently changing. We know that there's been a call for evidence from the government regulators in terms of how AI in the healthcare setting should be managed. So I think this is a dynamic and it's a fluid regulatory landscape at the moment, which is subject to change.
It's a grey area, isn't it? And I wasn't saying that because I feel like I know the answers, but it's just an interesting point, isn't it? We've all got our different perspectives on it. I think it's one example of the many areas of uncertainty with AI.
I completely agree. And you made a very interesting point. Reflections. Absolutely. I mean, for a ward round, for example, on the ICU, you've got your pharmacist, your psychologist, your nurse, your resident doctors, your consultant. AI is perfect to summarize that conversation rather than having the resident at bedside writing it. But if it makes a mistake, what happens? It's actually brilliant. I use it myself in my personal life, but I have to slightly disagree with you, Joe. I think we need regulation. I think it needs to be regulated as a medical device because that gives reassurance to all our colleagues. Okay, you can use it. Don't be afraid. It's approved. It's this grey area we're in now, which is a huge problem. We do need that really to be clarified. Otherwise, everything falls on us, on the clinician. If things go wrong, it falls on us. I think it needs to be shared between us, the company, and also the trust as well, because the trust is making the purchase of decisions. So if it's going to choose this AI over this AI on a cost basis, or the other AI may actually give you a better outcome.
Well, I think you're right. If as companies transition from making devices, which we used our medical intelligence to implement in the clinical practice, to devices, that kind of suite of intelligent devices which have medical intelligence within them, then some of that medical intelligence that, I'll excuse myself, but we have together, needs to be baked into that rather than being made, then simply deployed again, like has traditionally been the case.
And I'm going to add one more thing to that. We're talking about AI. As we all know, there was a massive change in AI really in the last year, agentic AI. So when that starts getting introduced, you probably have an agent that will look after your x-rays, an agent which will look after your transcription, and all those are probably going to interact together and be supervised by an overall supervising aid. There's some really interesting things happening in this field.
Yeah. So, let's dig into the kind of ICM one then. So what stage are we at now? We said the survey is open, Sanjay, right? And how are we getting on with it so far?
So please correct me if I'm wrong, Joe. I think we've got about 250 responses, which is a great start. But Joe, you gave that beautiful list there. Nurses, pharmacists, psychologists as well. Anybody who works in ICU, we want to hear what you want. And it's really interesting. I was on the ICU last week and I twisted the arms of a few nurses to get some responses. And they think of completely different things from us. I'll give you an example, is alarms. We all know, we're working on the ICU, you've got alarms going continuously. You get alarm fatigue, you ignore them. AI analyze the alarm. Okay, so let's say they're bending their arm, the art line trace isn't working, but actually the ECG is fine. The AI can filter that out. So then only the important alarms will be picked up. That's actually why you want an alarm. The same goes in the anaesthesia suite as well. I'm sure there's multiple times surgeons pressing with their big tummy on the wrist or whatever during the operation, just to give you some examples.
You highlighted perfectly there the whole point of this. You said the psychologists or the nurses, whoever, they will think of different suggestions that we don't. And that's the whole point of demand signals. It's the end user saying, these are problems for us. We need the technology to solve this. Let's not make a technology that solves a problem which may or may not exist or fix poorly with that.
I think that's a really important distinction to be made between ICU and the project as was carried out within anaesthesia. So the people who are at the bedside 24 hours a day in the ICU are the nurses. Their expectations, their needs, their demands for what intelligence looks like at the bedside are going to be very different from doctors who are swinging around a couple of times a day on a ward round. So I think it's vitally important to have the nurse's voice represented in this project.
And in terms of the process of, I suppose, getting your responses, having your meetings and things like that, who takes precedence? Is it the people that are there 24/7? Do you take their ideas more, say, than the doctors, or can you run two ideas at the same time?
part of that will come later in the analysis as we go through the results from where people's clinical pain points actually lie. There may be some sub-analysis to do in terms of separating out the different professional groups, and that might give us a bit more insight into the opinions and the perspectives of those different groups. But at the time being, as the survey is open, we're receiving opinion from everyone. And I am very much looking forward to seeing where those differences lie and how that relates to professional roles on the intensive care unit and also professional perspectives in regards to AI as a technology really goes forward in the future.
One of the things about demand signal, one of the key tenets is that an idea only needs to be suggested once. And it doesn't matter who by. If other people and another demographic suggest a particular issue 100 times, that 100 times gets condensed into a theme. But if someone else in a different sphere of the professional landscape suggests an idea, then that will also make us a theme. And so hopefully over time, those higher value opportunities will gradually rise to the top, no matter who suggested them or how many times.
That's something. You very kindly invited me to the Anaesthesia day where you brought all the ideas there. In each room, you had a physician, you had a member from industry, you had a patient, you had a regulation. And I was just in the background listening to how it was working. And I thought interaction between those groups, that all again, they had their different views, pulling that all together is why I suspect this project will work, because they all have their bits which are important. And again, we don't see it from the regulator point of view. We don't see it from the device company that, oh, you can't do that. But maybe if we tweak it slightly. So I think that's something that we need to understand. And I think you could explain that much better than I could, James.
Yeah, I spend most of my days these days being a non-physician, but clearly, I've got 20 years of being a physician, so I'll always think in that manner. We tend to sort of say, especially in anesthesia and in critical care, where we can say, I want this thing and I want it now. The blood pressure's not quite what I want it to be. I know the receptors, I know the drugs, I'm going to fix it within the next 20 seconds. But a lot of life doesn't work like that. And as technology and tools such as this sort of gradually mature and make it into the landscape of clinical practice, actually it's a team game. There's going to be multifaceted, experiences in this. It's going to be the patient, what they want or will accept, or what they need, what industry. And I think, of course, I work in an industry setting as well, but actually to make this a sustaining opportunity, then there needs to be commercial return on investment. Otherwise, we're just kind of pouring money down a black hole. So it needs to be an opportunity, a problem worth solving. From the regulators, they need to think about what's safe. They're far more inclined to think about, let's eliminate risk than kind of maximize opportunity. But that's kind of rightly so, because their job isn't about let's just try things. Their job is about keeping people safe. And in a way, that I think that kind of multifaceted element kind of feeds into why there's such an opportunity here. You said at the minute there is a huge opportunity, and I think that is absolutely true because the market is not as big as perhaps we think it is. There are 8 billion cell phones in the world, and they get turned over every couple of years. Whereas there's, I don't know, less than 1 million ventilators, and we make those things last. But the barrier to entry is really high, isn't it? Like, necessarily. But I think because we live in this data-rich environment, we're a tech-heavy set of specialties, actually the opportunity presents itself there, and we can try and steer that and learn from the successes and failures elsewhere to try and inform that.
James, I'm just going to add to that. Despite being very old, I have a 3-year-old at home. And when I went to university, cell phones were just coming in. And I compare the cell phone I have, the older listeners remember the Mercury 121, and to compare the iPhone 16 in my pocket, indescribable. The phone now is my compass, my map, my voice recorder, my entertainment device. I can give you 50 other things it can do. And I think that's the very important thing we need to realize. We're probably in generation 1, coming into generation 2 AI. Think 20 years from now when we're in generation 20 AI, how much it's going to help us. But I think one thing we didn't discuss, I think people are afraid, AI is going to take my job. AI, that's what they said in radiology, right? That's not happened. The researchers show that radiologists have become, I think, 40% to 80% more effective. Their accuracy is improved. The human in the loop is something which is really important. I think it's being recognized both by industry, by boards from the governance level, and by physicians as well. When you're actually treating a patient, you don't want to put the central line in or give the adrenaline unless you feel it's the right thing to do, just because the AI tells you. So that whole side of things has got to develop a little bit more.
So I want to come to that. That's a really important point about where we see this going. Before we do, Joe, so we're at the survey stage in a minute for ICU. What are the next stages? What's the rough timescale?
for the demand signaling project in ICM. We're doing a survey at the moment, which is going to close towards the end of July. We'll be looking at doing our Delphi prioritization process in August and September. And we'll be setting up our multidisciplinary discussion workshop to take place in November or December at the end of this year.
End of 2026. Yeah, exactly. So hopefully the listeners can kind of hear some more updates at those events and the resulting outputs as well. So Sanjay, then, let's say we're able to identify some high priority areas, we're able to explore them, bring people together. What do you think that means for ICU over the next 5 years, 10 years? What will that look like?
Sort of add one thing to your previous point, what Joe said. I'll put my hand up. I'm guilty of it. Whenever something's introduced or a change is made, I'll complain, oh, we used to do this, it was fine, why change, blah, blah, etc. But here, we're giving you the chance to tell you what you want to improve your life, your working life in ICU and anesthesia. Please complete the survey. This is your once in a lifetime opportunity, because then we can approach industry, we can approach regulators with the outcome of this and get these things brought in. So, sorry, James, I forgot your question now.
So we get people to fill in the survey, and Sanjay's right. Please, everyone, do fill in the survey. If you're practicing in ICU in the UK, we really want to hear from you. Let's say everybody does that. Look, we're inundated with responses. We go through this prioritization and workshop phase, and we say we want devices which do this function, agents which perform that function. What do you think that might look like 5 years time, 10 years time? Either what would it look like, what devices are out there, or how does the landscape change? Does it change our role? Does it change the function of ICU?
Okay, I'm going to just give you 5 things at the top of my head. I think the first thing is the transcription. No one's going to be writing anything. We'll do our wood rounds. We'll have a conversation just like we are. We'll examine the patient. The AI will summarize that for us and put that into the computer. That's what we're doing about our day. Maybe we've seen a patient, we've set some ventilator parameters. The AI will actually do that changes for us. So you're going to say you want to read a ventilator. I don't want the Emax above certain level. I want you to try and wean the oxygen. Whenever a blood gas is done, it'll look at that. Okay, I'm going to reduce the oxygen itself on the ventilator. So the nurse won't actually have to do that. As Joe said, we only visit the patient probably 2 or 3 times a day in our time. The AI is continuously there supporting the nurses. So it can do a lot of those tweaks, reduce the nurse's cognitive load. The nurses can then actually spend more time with the patient. If they're awake, talking to them, if they need certain things done, doing that. And I think one of the problems is overload. We've got so much information coming to us from so many different sources. If the AI can take some of the demand off, that'll be one aspect. I think from the point of view of drugs, etc., it'll help us look for prescribing medications, the interactions. I'm sure there are multiple interactions, which even though with the help of our pharmacists, we're still missing. I think one of the most interesting, exciting bits is research. So James, you're very heavily involved in research. But if I was to put all the journals on ICU on this table in front of me, it'll be probably as tall as you are, as tall as I am, yeah? Who has time to read those? If we have now a patient come in, this is what we've said on our ward round, can it not look at the journals? Say, oh, there's a journal from, I don't know, Japan, Korea, UK, which published 2 months ago or a year ago, which has got something similar. Perhaps you should suggest this treatment in addition to something else, or do this test to pick up this. Or if you missed this diagnosis, maybe you could pick up diagnosis 1, 2, and 3. You've missed diagnosis C.
A real-time sort of open evidence function as a medical device, almost. Although we don't get open evidence in the EU and UK these days.
What I was going to say was just kind of, I think as Sanjay has enumerated there are so many interesting and exciting AI applications that might be coming in the future. But what the project really speaks to is a need to find what clinicians really want. So exploring the clinical demands and then trying to marry that with the other side, which is industry capability. And once we have a rough idea of the kind of landscape of both of those two things, try slowly to kind of merge and to knit those two things together to meet in the middle. And I think part of that is getting more clinicians involved in the process of AI development, get people talking, having these conversations, getting these ideas out in the real world to empower clinicians, to get them more involved with industry and academia, and to arrive at those solutions together, whatever they may be.
I'm going to add to that something slightly to do with drug development. I'll give you an example. My best friend from medical school is a professor of ophthalmology at Moorfields, and he's started recently working with industry. And they developed a drug for the eye, and for certain things, it's actually not very useful for humans. And so they spent a lot of money developing this. But he thought, okay, why don't we do it in animals? For the animals, it's much more important in the pet industry, etc. So I'm not talking about, obviously, pets and stuff in the ICU, What we'll find when we talk to people who would be getting the responses from the survey, there's so many things which probably are very simple for industry to do and fix. So there's probably a load of 10 cheap wins, but due to demand signaling, we could then go and tell industry, please fix this. It's not going to be a huge cost.
The impact in high acuity specialties, as we know, is actually quite limited, particularly when, as you mentioned, Sanjay, radiology, only about 2% of the FDA approved AI-driven devices in America have been reviewed by an anesthesia panel. For the largest hospital specialty, anesthesia actually takes up a tiny fraction of the AI devices in the United States.
Okay. So I think I'll just kind of close on one thing that you said, Sanjay. I think you're talking about kind of elevating the role of clinician before. Say, for example, we're doing ward rounds. In future, maybe we'll do ward rounds. We don't write anything. We'll do the ward rounds, have our natural conversation, come to our conclusions, and then the kind of agentic system will capture what we said, document it appropriately, maybe even implement action. And that kind of makes me think of the future. I heard this kind of interesting talk a couple of months ago where someone was saying that with AI, rather than replacing physicians or clinicians as maybe been a perceived threat in the last 10 years, and some people have even espoused that kind of viewpoint, actually maybe it could elevate clinicians to make us more productive. And so rather than playing an instrument in the orchestra, you could sort of be the conductor of the orchestra. Does that appeal to you guys, Amy? What are your thoughts on that?
100%. And maybe it's not even to elevate, it's to try and help prevent mistakes. Like on your fourth night shift on a unit, I don't know whether I'm coming or going. We've admitted 6 patients. I'm trying to do the drugs. And that's where I make mistakes. And I think that's where everyone makes mistakes. So if I had AI as a backup to try and flag up when these might happen, I think it's great for patient safety. And then, as you said, Sanjay, about the summarizing and having the different thoughts and missing a diagnosis, I think it's great. And it's also a learning opportunity because I'm not going to read all of those. So yeah, elevate, prevent, patient safety. I think it's a great idea.
I 100% agree with you, Amy. It's going to be our partner. Okay, it's not going to replace us. It's not going to be our boss or overlord. We're not going to be it. It's going to be a partnership. If you watch films, okay, Terminator, everybody's quite scared about the Terminators coming. But in news as well, bad news sells. How often do you see good news, okay? I believe in the Star Trek universe rather than the Terminator universe. And I believe the Star Trek universe, hopefully the positive universe, will come to AI within ICU, anesthesia, and healthcare in general.
What a great place to close. Thanks very much. Finish by thanking our guests, Joe Harris, Sanjay Wijayatilake, and Amy Gomes, co-hosts on this episode today. I would like to thank you guys, our listeners. As ever, you can find all our TopMedTalk and TopMedTalk AI episodes on our websites and download them from any kind of podcatcher of your choice or all the available social media platforms. Please hit subscribe or like. It really does help us reach a broader audience. And finally, we want to thank our sponsors, BD Advanced Patient Monitoring and GE Healthcare. Without their support, we can't keep this platform open access, free at the point of use for the widespread dissemination of information. So thank you all very much. We'll see you next time.
TopMedTalk. And remember, the 2026 International Practicum on Cardiopulmonary Exercise Testing will be held from September the 16th to the 18th of this year. Come and join us at this premier educational event designed for clinicians, scientists and healthcare professionals interested in sport, exercise and perioperative medicine. Check out ebpom.org for the best prices and information now. That's ebpom.org.